Welcome. I'm Chris Iwerks with DavisNow. This presentation on brick walkway systems was first presented via Zoom on November 17th to Somerville city leaders, including Mayor Curtatone, Ward 6 Councilor Lance Davis, and the heads of Somerville's planning, infrastructure, and mobility departments. The purpose of this presentation is to provide information about how brick walkway systems have evolved and how they are being successfully implemented by cities and towns throughout New England. Some may be surprised to learn that brickmaking was Somerville's primary industry for most of the 19th century. At its height in 1870, 10 companies combined to turn out upwards of 24 million bricks a year. Somerville has a significant heritage in brick manufacturing, and the masonry structures we see all around are quite literally built from the clay right here beneath us. Jumping forward 110 years to 1984, Davis Square was completely reconfigured as part of the new MBTA Red Line Station project, with a new layout of brick walkways extending out from the central plazas around the main traffic intersection. There was a recent plan and funding to repair the walkways 2 years ago, but that has not yet materialized. And as we know, the walks remain in poor state of repair. While originally pristine and beautiful, we have gradually learned that the installation techniques employed were vulnerable to movement, making some of the walks unsafe, inaccessible, and unsightly. While the older brick walks in Davis have not been maintained, the 2014 brick installation at Kenny Park at the eastern end of Davis shows how brick can be successfully used for walkways. 7 years have passed since the park was completed, and the intricate radial pattern remains dead flat and free from the irregularities we see in the older sections of the square. What then are the criteria to judge by? For any walkway system to be successful here in Davis Square, it needs to satisfy these parameters. It needs to be accessible and safe. It needs to be durable. It needs to be maintainable and repairable. It needs to imbue a character which is fitting for Davis Square. And the life cycle cost is an important consideration, not only first cost, but the cost of maintaining and repairing the materials over the span of its life. In regards to these criteria, the question is, how are other cities and towns deciding in favor of brick walks? To help us understand the issues surrounding brick walkway systems, we've invited 3 experts with extensive technical and practical knowledge of brick, each bringing a different perspective on the topic. Diane Beck is the director of the Cambridge Brickwalk Conservancy. Diane has been a successful advocate for brick walkways in Cambridge, where she has persuaded the city to create new guidelines and practices for preserving, repairing, and replacing brick walks. Kevin Berry is a vice president with Stiles and Hart Brick Company. Kevin brings a wealth of knowledge about brick installations in other communities, as well as information about the new science that's been developed for testing walkway surfaces. And John Amadeo, principal landscape architect with IBI Placemaking. John is also the chair of the Boston South End Landmark District Commission and a member of the Boston Landmarks Commission. John has over 20 years of experience on these commissions where brick walkways are a central topic, as well as the practical experience of designing unit paver walkway systems over the course of his career. First, let's hear from Diane.
Thank you. Thank you for having me join you all. The first slide here shows a policy which was made in 2019 before COVID. And what I will talk a little bit more about that. And of course, the Cambridge Brickwalk Conservancy, which is an organization formed almost a decade ago to actually preserve, maintain, and have hopefully considered extension of brick sidewalks in Cambridge. And the policy came just a couple of years ago, And in between that, there's been a lot of research that I found through a lot with Kevin Berry, the Brick Industry Association, and University of Pittsburgh, and a whole group of organizations that are interested in brick. So that was the beginning of Cambridge Brick Walk Conservancy. And one of the high points, I think, is this policy. And what it does is to direct the DPW to take direction from the city manager to maintain the brick sidewalks and make sure that they're compliant with ADA, that there's not just asphalt thrown on them and left there for years, which had been the way they were doing things, but to make it a priority to repair these sidewalks and to ensure this full compliance. And also to bring any appropriations that are necessary for this work before the city council, which will then approve it. Also over the years, another thing called Commonwealth Connector, and it gets you to a site called ClickFix. And on that, as you're walking along the streets, and I think this is true in a lot of cities and towns in Massachusetts anyway, you walk over the street, you see a problem, you open up the application, you go to ClickFix, and it says, is this a sidewalk issue? And you say yes, and you take a photo and you can upload it to the site, and you tell them the address, which is probably also on your phone, and it goes directly to the DPW, and they direct it to where it should go to be properly corrected. And I did a lot of work with the neighborhood associations to have them spread the word. I mean, the more people that know about this, the more the DPW can do. There's a lot of miles on streets and sidewalks in Cambridge. I think there's over 200 miles. So the fact that there's a number of people that care about the streets and safety, they'll take pictures, send them in. And I put my name on it. A lot of people go anonymously, but I think, they should know who's, feel proud that you're trying to take care of our city. There's a picture on the upper right-hand side of Harvard Square. And Harvard Square is a historic district, and so it's been able to maintain its brick sidewalks. We've had success in talking with Harvard when they were redoing the Smith Center, which is on Mass Ave just as you go into the square. And they were going to rip up the brick sidewalks, and the historic district actually helped save those bricks. And there was a brick sidewalk inside the building that went from Mass Ave over, I think it's Mount Auburn Street. And they were going to rip that out too. And I worked with Harvard, and the Cambridge Brick Walk Conservancy worked with them, and they have a brick sidewalk inside. So it's been, we've had some success, but it is difficult to fight a lot of these battles. But the research has helped. When they first started talking about it, well, it was slippery. It was too slippery. Well, when Lexington was going forward with their town center, and they were going to pull up the bricks, a lot of the business owners got together and formed a committee, and they fought, and they had a wet test done at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth, and that proved that actually brick was better for slipperiness than concrete. We did the same thing with the roughness, and they said that wheelchair users, oh, well, it was too rough to go over brick. Well, we also proved that wrong during studies at the University of Pittsburgh, which proved that in fact, brick, when it's laid correctly and designed correctly, is a smoother ride for wheelchairs. So there's a lot of research out there on the side of bricks. I think let's see, the pictures at the bottom, on the left-hand side, that is in Salem, where they've done a lovely job of installing brick all around the Peabody Essex Museum and in many of their streets. And on the right-hand side is the new Harvard Art Museums. And they have brick all around. It's laid beautifully and it's well taken care of. Next slide. That is, again, that's Lexington Center, and it shows where they've been working on it, and they have saved the brick in Lexington Center. This has not been easy. It's not like, you know, we say 1 month we're going to do this and the next month it's done. This has been years of committees and going back and forth and figuring out how it's going to be done. And they've done a lovely job with the center. So it can be done, and we're hoping that the same can be done in Somerville. Thank you.
All right. Now we're going to turn over to Kevin Berry.
Hi, I'm Kevin Barry with Stiles and Hart Brick Company. We are Massachusetts' only and last remaining brick manufacturer. I also am the past chair of the paving committee for the Brick Industry Association, which is our industry's national association. To follow up on what Diane was saying, a lot of the municipalities in our part of the country, and frankly all over the country, are grappling with, you know, different types of pavements and sidewalks and certain issues, and some have had the same experience as Cambridge and Lexington, where they're replacing existing pavements that have been down for 50 to 100 years. A couple of them are pictured here. You have Salem, you know, Portsmouth's a little bit that way as well, but other cities and towns have had different challenges. For instance, Waltham, they have a very vibrant restaurant and merchant area along Moody Street, and they wanted to replace their sidewalks, which were actually segmental concrete pavers that were not performing well. They were worn, you know, UV damage and damage from rock salt and the kind of thing that attacks concrete. So when they put it out for design, it came in and there was a block that was going to be brick, and then the rest of the area was going to be poured concrete with a brick strip, which we see in a lot of places. And the mayor got involved and said, well, you know, is it possible to do the whole thing in brick? And of course, people thought it wasn't. And she pursued it and with the merchants, and lo and behold, the whole downtown area of Moody Street is in fact brick paved. And now with restaurants moving to the outdoors, it's really a nice spot, and it's a very vibrant scene. Another place that's put in brick where it wasn't in the past is the town of Hingham, very historic town, and they wanted to try to maintain the character. I think people seem to find that brick has a human scale to it that, you know, large expanses of poured concrete just don't have. But those are a couple places that put it where it wasn't. Others have had other challenges. The town of Dennis, for instance, down on the bottom left-hand corner, the Mass Highway was doing a reconstruction of Route 28, and the sidewalks had to come up because they were changing the curb heights and the widths and everything else. And they had a brick pavement that was probably down for close to 50 years, and it was actually performing quite well. And Mass Highway's plan was to just put in poured concrete. Well, the merchants there and the town fathers didn't like the idea of that at all. And they approached the state and came to the conclusion that they could have their brick sidewalks back, and the state went along with it, and they have done this in other places. I know another place that's done that is Framingham. Another historic city that's had installed brick is the city of Quincy. Not unlike Somerville, an older city adjacent to Boston, and Quincy's doing a downtown restructuring and restoration. And they, it's not pictured here, but in the Adams Hancock Park, they've done brick pavers, which leads to a big plaza area in front of the visitor center and the city hall. And it's really quite a nice gathering spot, and folks like it. So, you know, essentially we found that, you know, the data seems to show that the choice for wheelchair users, brick can be a very suitable choice. compared to other types of pavements. And we can slide on to the next slide if you would. And that takes me to, and Diane mentioned it earlier, the roughness testing. This came out of the Human Engineering Research Laboratory at the University of Pittsburgh. In about 2002, Dr. Cooper, who was studying wheelchairs and their interaction with different surfaces, decided to start testing wheelchairs on brick and cobblestones and poured concrete and aggregate and all kinds of different asphalt, all kinds of different surfaces. And he himself is a wheelchair-bound person. And he seemed to come to the conclusion that, the brick wasn't as bad as people were thinking. And maybe, a lot of it had to do with the installation, not necessarily the product itself. And older methods of installation used mortar and wide joints, and the joints really seemed to be the problem. But, it was more anecdotal because they didn't really have measurement devices. So out of years of research, they developed ASTM E3028, which is the standard for roughness testing of pavements. And this was funded by the U.S. Access Board, as well as the Brick Industry Association and the Interlocking Concrete Association in the VA. And the results of that was what we're looking at now is a measuring device, which is called PathMet, and that's in the lower right-hand corner. And that measures roughness of pavements according to this ASTM code. And there are three categories. There's green, there's yellow, and there's red. And over a 3 or 4 year period, these folks tested 99 different sites. Most of them were brick because it was funded by the Brick Industry Association. And the bulk of them landed in the green area. Only one failed in the red area. And again, the results indicate it's not the age of the pavement or even really the maintenance, although maintenance is important. It has more to do with the design in the installation. And the results have shown that brick pavers, when designed and installed properly, actually perform better and are more comfortable than poured concrete. And again, some of that has to do with the joints as much as anything else. And with that, I'd like to hand it off to John.
Thanks, Kevin. And that's actually a great segue into what I'll be speaking about, which is about the design and installation of brick paving. And there's been a real evolution over time for that, the design and the installation of brick paving. And it starts with the types of brick that one would use. Not all brick is created equal. And the brick that has been prevalent throughout New England, especially the Boston, Cambridge, Somerville area, is the Stiles and Hart brick, which because of its use in a large-scale project back in the 1960s, which was City Hall Plaza in Boston, the brick began to be, that same brick began to be called the City Hall paver. And that is the brick shown on the lower left in this slide. And an example of its installation is in the picture just above it, which is in Somerville. And that brick is the Stiles and Hart brick. And that brick is a molded brick. The clay is put in a mold, and the reason it's called water struck is because water is the lubricant that is used to slide the brick out of its mold after it has been fired. The result of that process gives us bricks where almost no two bricks are exactly alike dimensionally. And if you look at the lower left picture, you'll see that while the bricks are roughly rectangular, they're each of the three of those bricks are slightly different lengths and widths. And if you were to look at their thickness, you'd notice that their thickness is ever so slightly different also. And that makes setting them challenging. And the best way to set those kinds of bricks is on sand. But sand is not the most durable over time if you want to keep a level paving surface. And we'll get to that in a moment, but I want to talk about the other two kinds of brick. And the second kind of brick is sand cast. And that's also a molded brick where the clay is put into a mold. And then the sand is actually used to line the mold. And that becomes the non-stick surface that allows you to slide the brick out of its mold when it's fully fired. And the same thing happens with sand cast brick as with water-struck brick, which is that while both with water-struck and sand cast brick, you get bricks with great character, part of that character comes from the fact that they're slightly irregular and you don't get an exact brick from one brick to the next. They're dimensionally different and you don't get the setting tolerances that you need to get a perfectly flat brick paved surface. That leads us to the third kind of brick, which was developed more in the last number of decades, whereas brick has been used for thousands of years, going back to the Romans. Ancient Rome had brick paving, but it's only been in the last several decades that we've had something called wire cut brick. And wire cut brick is formed by creating large blocks of clay brick and then wire cutting the individual bricks from that large block. And because you're wire cutting, you get a precision that you don't get with casting. And so the bricks come out virtually the same dimension in length, width, and thickness. And it gives you much more flexibility in how to set the brick. And that will bring us to the next slide. There are three different ways you can set brick. The first way is on a flexible base, which is on sand. And that has been the long-standing method of setting brick, probably right up until the early 1980s. And so many of our brick sidewalks that have gone in prior to that, and I think Chris said that it was 1984 when Davis Square had its brick installed, and that was probably one of the last remaining major projects where you're setting public brick sidewalks and plazas on sand, because after that the industry started to switch over to other methods of setting. But up until then, setting on sand made it possible to set bricks with different thicknesses to be even at the top in the initial setting, because the sand was a flexible base and you could work the sand so that you could get every brick next to one another even. The problem with the flexible base is that over time, that flexible base does what flexible bases do, they flex. And therefore, you started to get wavy pavements and uneven pavements over time. It's easy to reset them when they're on sand. You just pick them up and throw a little more sand down and put the brick back down. But that requires constant ongoing maintenance. So another way to set brick, which would be a little bit more durable over time, is to set it with mortar joints on a concrete base. And that would be the middle picture here. And there you have City Hall Plaza on the lower photograph and the setting above it. And the problem with the advantages of mortar set brick is that the brick will stay put. And the mortar is very durable on top of a concrete base, which is also very durable. And you would get an even pavement. The disadvantage of this is that the joints are thicker, and as Kevin mentioned, with mortar joints, you can actually feel every single joint under a wheel or even underfoot. And also the mortar is subject to degradation. The mortar is subject to degradation when it is subject to de-icing salts in the winter. And therefore the joints become even more pronounced because you can feel them more as the mortar starts to degrade between the bricks. Also, with that degradation, you get bricks popping periodically out of mortared brick. The third way to set brick, which became a method that was developed in the, it could have been developed before the early 1980s, but it became more widespread in the industry to set brick this way in the 1980s, and that is setting brick with hand-tight joints on a mortar setting bed on either a mortar or a concrete base slab. And the concrete base slab is rigid. The mortar setting bed is also rigid. The problem with the mortar setting bed being rigid is that you can't use bricks of different thicknesses to be set on that kind of a base and setting bed, because you will get an uneven surface. And so that became the setting method that was ideal for the wire cut bricks, because the wire cut bricks are reliably the same thickness. They meet all of those ASTM requirements that Kevin Barry had mentioned. So we can now go to the next slide, and we will see how the city of Boston has dealt with this evolution. Because as you might know, the neighborhoods of Beacon Hill, parts of Back Bay, all of the South End, and the significant historic center of Charlestown all have brick sidewalks. And all of those brick sidewalks are set on sand using a Stiles and Hart cast brick or something similar. And it is those sidewalks that started to get people to be concerned about the use of brick paving when it comes to universal access. However, with the evolution of brick being wire cut and the introduction of the Hastings method of the asphalt setting bed on a concrete base, the city of Boston started to come around to allowing brick sidewalks to be repaired with brick again, but it has to be set in that particular method. And if you look at what's on the screen now is the city of Boston's policy for replacing brick sidewalks where there are existing brick sidewalks. And in historic districts, if you look at the very bottom, it says in historic districts, existing sidewalks that are brick shall be reconstructed with wire cut bricks on a bed of asphalt or concrete per Public Works standards, and that pretty much is the policy that they use now. If you are in a non-historic district, at the top of the page, it says, if an existing sidewalk is constructed with brick, it can be replaced with brick if the aesthetic surroundings lend itself to a brick sidewalk. And there is an agreement between the Disability Commission and the neighborhood residents to do so. So this policy was developed in 2014, and it was developed by the Persons with Disabilities Commission. So this policy has the blessing, if you will, of the Persons with Disabilities Commission in Boston to replace existing brick sidewalks with brick in historic districts or in areas where the surroundings lend themselves to brick sidewalks. We can go to the next slide then. This is the code. And you'll say, well, what does the code have to say about brick paving? We have two codes that we work with in Boston. We have a state code and we have federal guidelines. The top is actually the Mass AAB law, 7.4 pavers, paving stones and bricks, that says the use of surface paving products such as pavers, paving stones and bricks shall be permitted on accessible routes as long as you are in compliance with the other parts of the Massachusetts law that requires that you meet such standards for smoothness and skid resistance that you heard Kevin and Diane speak about earlier. And you've heard them both say that brick paving can meet those standards for skid resistance and smoothness. The bottom where it says 302 floor or ground surfaces is ADA's policy. which simply says that ground surfaces shall be stable, firm, and slip resistant and shall comply with 302. There's actually no part of ADA that speaks for or against brick or unit paving as long as it meets those standards. So it's basically a performance standard for ADA as a guideline. And we can go to the next slide then, which talks about the alternative to brick. Many times the advocates for universal access will advocate for concrete paving as an alternative for brick with the with their understanding that concrete would be preferable because it performs better. However, that's not entirely the case. You can see the photographs on the left showing what happens when concrete is exposed to de-icing salts. And you can see right there that it loses any advantage it may have had for smoothness and to provide proper footing or a smooth riding surface for wheels. We also get concrete subject to all kinds of cracking, usually as a result of what we call freeze thaw. Now, you could say, well, if you set the brick on concrete, wouldn't the concrete crack? Yes, but you wouldn't get the, first of all, it wouldn't be as exposed to the elements in order to be subject to freeze thaw cracking like this. And secondly, you wouldn't be seeing the cracks, and the brick on top would remain smooth even if the concrete below it were to crack. Although it would be less likely to do so because it is protected by the brick and the asphalt setting bed that it would be put on. So then the other thing that concrete is subject to when exposed to freeze thaw, and freeze thaw happens when water gets between the joints, which it wouldn't when brick is set on top of the concrete. But when concrete is exposed to the elements and water gets between the joints of the concrete, you get water down below the concrete, and when it freezes in the winter, that water expands in the form of ice and lifts the concrete, and so you get uplift. So these are the kinds of conditions that concrete is subject to that really doesn't make it superior to brick as a paving surface, especially when you're looking at universal access and what would be better and more beneficial for people who have mobility challenges. We can go to the next slide. Another element that concrete has is that when it's put in, it looks very different than the older concrete around it, so the repairs stand out. So there is that aesthetic disadvantage. And there's another example of differential movement between different materials, especially for those who are advocating for things like concrete sidewalks with the brick strip, where you want to maintain some element of historic character. Well, that doesn't work either because the concrete will lift where the brick won't. And you will end up with that tripping hazard at the interface between brick and concrete. And I think we can go to the next slide. And these are examples of contemporary installations of brick in Boston. We'll start with the upper right slide, which is that is Post Office Square. And Post Office Square was done in 1986. And so this is one of the earliest installations of brick using the Hastings method of brick, wire cut brick set on the asphalt setting bed on a concrete base. And this is now going on 36 years, 37 years old, and it is still quite smooth and has all the smoothness and slip resistance that Diane and Kevin described earlier. The picture below it is the south end. This was an installation in between 2010 and 2012 by the MBTA when they replaced all of the sidewalks on Massachusetts Avenue between Boston Medical Center and the Orange Line station, the Mass Ave Orange Line station. And they did this as a reconstruction of Massachusetts Avenue in the South End. The South End is a historic district, so Massachusetts Avenue was within the district, so it was required to put in brick. The brick was put in as wire cut brick on the asphalt setting bed on a concrete base, as required by the City of Boston paving standards. And this met those standards. And the sidewalks are about 8 years old now, and they look exactly as they did when they went in. On the lower left, this is a newly repaired Christian Science Plaza. This is actually my project. And just in 2019, 2020, all of the brick in the Christian Science Plaza was replaced as a comprehensive restoration of the entire plaza. And the plaza originally had molded brick set on concrete. And because it was a molded brick set on concrete, it wasn't entirely smooth or level is what I meant to say. It was a glazed brick, so the brick actually had did not meet the slip resistance. So we put in wire cut brick that had the proper slip resistance, and it's all set on the asphalt setting bed on a concrete base. You can see that in this photograph that it's smooth as glass, and 10 years from now, it would look exactly like this. The upper left picture is a rendering. The other three pictures are photographs of installments. The rendering above is City Hall Plaza as it will look probably next year. It's under construction now. If you went there now, you would see a construction fence around City Hall Plaza, and it's all torn up. And the entirety of the plaza is being paved again with brick. And you would say, well, why brick when everybody didn't like the brick plaza before? But it's because it was a mortared brick before, but now this is all going to be hand-type bricks set on the asphalt setting bed with the concrete slab below. And the Persons with Disabilities Commission director sits in that building, in that picture, City Hall, and has approved the installation of brick again in City Hall Plaza. So those are the contemporary installations in Boston, how Boston has been dealing with brick in its historic districts or in its areas where brick would be appropriate. So you can go to the next slide. This is a contemporary installation at UMass Amherst. It's a few hours out of Boston in Somerville, but this is another one of my projects, and the main spine of campus that was asphalt before has now been reinstalled as a 20-foot wide walkway, the middle 12 feet of which is brick. And that was put in because of the brick character of the campus. Among some of its oldest buildings are all brick, and they wanted to maintain that character. And this is set with the wire cut bricks on the asphalt setting bed on a concrete base. And it has the concrete borders on the side only because they didn't want the 20-foot wide spine, which is 20-foot wide requirement for fire truck access, to just look as wide as 20 feet. So the concrete borders were there to just make the walkway look more slender, and not because they wanted concrete. And in fact, 6 months after this was installed, the concrete was already starting to spall as a result of de-icing salts being used in the winter before the concrete had fully cured, while the brick looked perfectly fine, exactly as it did after the day it was installed, showing that actually the brick is a more durable surface than the concrete. So we can go to the next slide.
Well, people love Davis Square. They love the character of Davis Square, but there's a lot of uncertainty about whether the brick is a viable material for all the walkways and plazas that we've got. And the purpose of this presentation has been to show that brick can work. Use of the right brick materials and installation techniques will enable us to restore Davis's character while also meeting all of the criteria that really define success. And that's, it's accessible, it'll make safe sidewalks, they'll be highly durable, they'll be easy to maintain, And there are great life cycle cost benefits to using a material that will last a long time. I'd like to thank our panelists for sharing their knowledge and time to put this presentation together. DavisNow is an organization that advocates for restoring Davis Square, kind of the public realm elements of Davis Square. And to learn more, you can visit us at davisnow.org. Thank you.